The day my mother introduced me to her country club friends as our family's little helper, I was standing in my own hospital wing, not visiting, not touring. My name was on the wall behind her in brushed steel letters, right next to the words cardiac surgery unit, and she was pointing at the gift shop across the lobby telling her friend Lorraine that I'd helped with some of the decorating. I didn't correct her. That's the part that still keeps me up sometimes, even now. I just smiled and said hello to Lorraine, and then I excused myself because I had a 6 a.m. bypass scheduled for the next morning, and I needed to review the imaging one more time. That was 12 years into my career as a cardiac surgeon. I'd been doing that, not correcting her, for all 12 of them. Let me back up, because if I just tell you the ending, you'll think I'm the villain of my own story. And maybe I am, a little. Maybe we all are, in the stories we let other people tell about us. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, in a house that smelled like my mother's perfume and my father's disappointment. My father worked in mining administration. My mother ran the household like a general runs a campaign, strategically, efficiently, and always with one eye on how things looked from the outside. We weren't wealthy, but my mother had a gift for making us appear comfortable in rooms full of people who actually were. My older sister, Daphne, was her masterpiece. Blonde, pretty, married young to a man named Tristan who wore fleece vests to dinner and coached his son's hockey team with the kind of enthusiasm that made strangers think he was running for office. My mother adored him. She used his name the way some people use punctuation, constantly, and without seeming to notice they're doing it. Tristan thinks, she'd say. I was the other one. The quiet one. The one with the grades. When I was 15, I told my parents I wanted to be a doctor. My father nodded like I'd said something reasonable. My mother asked if I'd considered nursing instead, because doctors work such terrible hours, and it's hard on a family. I didn't have a family yet. I was 15, but I understood what she meant. It was hard on her image of what my future should look like. I got into McMaster's Health Sciences program on a full merit scholarship. I remember opening the email in the kitchen and feeling something lift off my chest. This enormous, quiet relief, like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years without knowing it. I went downstairs to tell my parents. My mother was on the phone. She held up one finger, one moment, and kept talking to whoever it was about Daphne's upcoming bridal shower. When she finally hung up, I told her. She said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Did you start the dishwasher?" I started the dishwasher. I want to be honest about something here because I've spent a lot of time in therapy untangling this, and I think it matters. I wasn't a martyr. I wasn't a saint. I was a person who had learned, very early, that the fastest way to survive in my family was to make myself small and useful. Small enough that I didn't upset anyone. Useful enough that they kept me around. So that's what I did. Through med school, through residency, through my fellowship in cardiac surgery at Toronto General, I sent money home when my parents asked. I came home for Christmas even when I had call. I smiled at Tristan's hockey stories and helped my mother address Christmas cards and never, not once, told anyone what I actually did in that operating room. My family knew I was a doctor. They just didn't know what kind. Or rather, my mother had decided what kind, and correcting her felt like more trouble than it was worth. In her version of my life, I was a heart doctor. Which, technically. But the way she said it made it sound like I checked blood pressure at a walk-in clinic. She'd tell people I worked at the hospital downtown, the same way she'd tell them Daphne did some decorating. Vague, fond, slightly condescending. A way of making sure the accomplishment reflected on her without requiring her to learn anything specific about it. The money thing started when I was in my second year of residency. My father called, which was unusual. He rarely called, and told me there was a situation with the furnace. They needed $3,000 and could I help? I was making resident wages, which in Canada at the time meant I was technically earning less per hour than the nurses I worked beside, but I had no dependents and I'd been scrimping, so I had some savings. I sent the money. That was the door opening. Over the next 7 years, I sent money for the furnace, for a new roof, for my mother's dental work, for Daphne's wedding flowers when Tristan's investment went sideways, for the down payment on Daphne and Tristan's second car, for 3 separate family emergencies that were never fully explained to me, and for a backyard renovation my mother had described as urgent but which turned out, when I finally visited, to involve a water feature and a new pergola. I'm not listing these things to make myself look good. Listing them because for a long time I genuinely didn't see the pattern. I was busy. I was tired. I was in the operating room at 5 in the morning, and I was reading charts at midnight, and somewhere in between I was wiring money home and telling myself that this was what families did, that one day things would even out, that my mother would eventually see me and say you did something remarkable and mean it. That day kept not coming. What came instead were the calls. My mother had a particular rhythm to them. She'd open with something warm, ask about my weekend, mention that Daphne's youngest had started skating lessons, and then, about 8 minutes in, there would be a pause. A specific kind of pause. And then, I don't want to bother you with this, but I'd been hearing that pause for so long I'd started to dread it the way I'd dread a bad EKG reading. It meant something was about to cost me. I'd been at Toronto General for 4 years when the hospital announced the new cardiac surgery pavilion. I'd been part of the team that designed it, not the architecture, obviously, but the clinical workflow, the equipment specifications, the layout of the surgical suites. There was going to be a donor recognition wall, and because I'd spent 3 years courting the lead donor, a retired mining executive from Timmins who'd lost his wife to a heart attack and wanted to do something meaningful with his money, my name was going on the wall too. There was a dinner. A proper one, with a guest list and assigned seating and a dress code. I was allowed to bring 2 guests. I invited my mother and my father. I don't know what I thought, that it might matter to them, that seeing my name on a wall in a building I'd helped build might finally make it real. I sent them the invitation in February. The dinner was in April. My mother called in March to confirm she was coming and to ask if Destan could come too, because he'd had a hard winter and it would be good for him to get out. I said Tristan was welcome, but I only had 2 guest passes, and she was one of them, so we'd need to figure it out. She figured it out by inviting herself, my father, and Tristan, and presenting this to the event coordinator as a fait accompli. I found out when the coordinator emailed me to say that a Mrs. Whitmore, my mother, had called to confirm a table for 4. I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift. I let it go. The night of the dinner, I drove myself. My parents had taken the train down from Sudbury, and Tristan had driven from Barrie, and they were all already in the lobby when I arrived, my mother in a beige blazer I recognized from Daphne's engagement party, Tristan in his fleece vest, indoors, in April, at a black tie-adjacent event, and my father holding a glass of sparkling water and looking mildly bewildered, which was his default expression at anything that wasn't a hockey game or a Tim Hortons. My mother saw me first. She waved. And then, before I could cross the lobby, her friend Lorraine appeared from somewhere. I still don't know how Lorraine got there. I didn't invite her. And the 2 of them fell into a hug, and my mother turned to make introductions. Lorraine, you remember my youngest, she said. She works at the hospital. Oh, wonderful, Lorraine said. What do you do there? And my mother said, oh, she's in cardiac. She helps with the surgeries. Helps with the surgeries. I had performed over 300 open heart procedures. I had a research publication in the Canadian Journal of Cardiology. I had just spent 3 years negotiating a 7-figure donation that was paying for the wing we were standing in. She said I help with the surgeries. I looked at Lorraine. I looked at my mother. I smiled and said it was lovely to meet her, and then I excused myself to find the event coordinator, because I had things to do before the program began. I told myself I wasn't hurt. I was very good at telling myself that. The dinner went well, in the objective sense. The food was good, the speeches were appropriate, and when my name was read aloud as part of the donor relations acknowledgement, there was genuine applause from the room. My mother leaned over to Lorraine, who was somehow now seated at our table. I still don't understand the logistics, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Later, in the car, she told me it had been a very nice event. She said the salmon was a bit dry. She asked if I got to keep any of the leftover centerpieces. I said no. She said that was too bad, they would have looked nice in Daphne's sunroom. I drove home and I sat in my apartment for a long time without turning on the lights. The call about the money came 3 weeks later. It was the furnace again, different furnace, same pause, $2,200. Could I manage it? This time, something shifted. Not dramatically. I didn't hang up. I didn't say anything sharp or final. I just sat with the phone against my ear, listening to my mother's voice going through the familiar architecture of the ask, and I thought, I am 41 years old. I performed emergency bypass surgery on a 67-year-old grandfather last Tuesday, and he is alive because of my hands. And I send money every time someone asks, and nobody in my family knows my title, and my mother told Lorraine I help with the surgeries. I said I'd think about it, and I'd let her know. I didn't send the money. She called again 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was mostly fine and slightly pointed. I know you're busy, just let us know when you get a chance. Then Daphne called, because of course she did, and Daphne's message was less fine and more pointed. Mum said you've been my. She's stressed about the furnace. I don't know why this is always such a production with you. I sat with that for a while too. I want to be clear, I didn't set out to engineer a moment. I'm not that calculated. What I did was much simpler and much harder. I just started letting things be exactly what they were instead of smoothing them over. I stopped sending money. I stopped answering every call. I started being honest in small ways. When my mother described what I did to someone at Christmas and got it wrong, I quietly corrected her. Actually, I performed the surgeries, I'd say, pleasantly, and then move on. She never acknowledged the correction. But I stopped letting the wrong version go unchallenged. This went on for about 8 months. It was uncomfortable in the way that only family discomfort can be, low-grade, persistent, the kind of thing you carry in your shoulders. Then came Aunt Bet's retirement party. Aunt Bet is my father's sister. She'd spent 40 years as a school principal in Sault Marie, and she was retiring with the kind of send-off she absolutely deserved. A proper dinner at the Bush Plain Heritage Center, which she'd chosen because she'd been taking her students there since 1987, and she loved it unreasonably, and nobody was going to talk her out of it. I loved Aunt Bet. She was the only person in my extended family who had ever asked me, directly, what a cardiac surgery procedure actually involved, and then listened to the whole answer. I drove up, 8 hours from Toronto, because I wanted the time to think and I don't mind driving. The party was on a Saturday evening. I arrived at the venue early, which is my habit. I'm congenitally incapable of being late to anything, probably a surgical training artifact. And I was talking to Aunt Bet near the entrance when my mother arrived with Daphne and Tristan and their 3 kids. My mother looked around the room, spotted a cluster of people she knew from the family's Sault Ste. Marie connections, and pulled Daphne toward them immediately. I watched this from across the room and felt nothing in particular, which I recognized as progress. The moment came about an hour in. I was getting a drink at the bar, soda water. I was driving back that night, and my mother's friend group had expanded to include a man I didn't recognize, someone's husband, in town from Ottawa. He was asking about the family the way people do at these things, and my mother was doing her social inventory. Daphne and Tristan, the grandchildren, my father's recent retirement from the mining office, and then me. And my youngest is here too, she said, and I could hear her from maybe 4 feet away. She's in healthcare. The man from Ottawa said, "Oh, what does she do?" A pause. A different pause from the usual one, shorter, almost impatient. "She's support staff at a hospital in Toronto," my mother said. "She helps out in the cardiac unit." Support staff. I set down my soda water. I'm not going to pretend I planned what happened next. I've replayed it enough times to know it was reflex more than strategy. I turned around and I walked the 4 feet and I joined the conversation. "Hi," I said, to the man from Ottawa. "I'm Dr. Whitmore. I'm the head of cardiac surgery at Toronto General." He blinked. "Oh," he said. "Wow." My mother made a sound. I don't have a word for it. It wasn't quite a laugh, it wasn't quite a gasp. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing. "That's she's being modest," my mother said. "Obviously we're all very proud." "Head of the department?" the man said, still looking at me. "Since last year," I said. "Though I've been with the division for about 9 years now." I picked up my soda water. "It was nice to meet you," I said, and I went to find Aunt Bet. I want to tell you that was the moment everything changed. That my mother pulled me aside with tears in her eyes and said she was sorry, that she finally saw me, that all the years of making myself small and sending money and letting the wrong version of my life go uncorrected had finally cracked something open. It wasn't, quite. What happened was quieter than that and more complicated. My mother avoided me for the rest of the party. My father found me by the vintage aircraft exhibit and talked to me about propeller mechanics for 20 minutes, which was the most sustained conversation we'd had in years, and I don't think either of us knew what to do with that. Daphne texted me while I was in the parking lot at the end of the night. "Did you seriously do that in front of everyone?" I texted back, yes. She didn't reply. I drove back to Toronto through the dark and the Northern Ontario silence, and I thought about all the years I'd spent translating myself into something smaller so that I'd fit into the space my family had made for me. And I thought about the patients I'd had that year, the 63-year-old teacher from Brampton, the 48-year-old contractor from Hamilton, who'd cried when I told him he was going home, and how those people had trusted me with the most fragile possible version of themselves. How that trust had never made me feel small. The call came on a Tuesday, about 2 weeks later. My mother's name on my phone, and I answered it because I had decided I was done not answering things. She didn't start with the warm-up. She went straight to it. "I didn't know," she said, "that you were the head. I didn't know that's what you were. I didn't say I told you. I didn't say I corrected you at Christmas, twice. I didn't say any of the things I'd rehearsed in the car on the way home from Sault Ste. Marie. I said, I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I think I made it easier not to know," she said, finally. "I think I didn't ask." I sat with that for a long time, both of us on the phone not saying anything. Here is what I've learned, and I offer it carefully, because I don't think my experience is universal. Some parents withhold recognition not because they don't love you, but because recognizing your full self would require them to revise a story they've been telling for a long time. The story where they are the important ones, where the family's success runs through them, where your accomplishments are a footnote in their narrative. Revising that story is painful. It means acknowledging years of not asking, not listening, not knowing. My mother didn't apologize that night. Not exactly. But she asked me questions, real ones, for the first time. She asked how many people were in my department. She asked what happens during a bypass, the actual mechanics of it, the way Aunt Bet had asked me years ago. She asked if I liked the work. "I love it," I said. And I meant it the way I had at 15, before I'd learned to make myself small, raw and certain and entirely my own. She asked about the money, eventually. Whether I resented sending it, some of it, I said honestly, the water feature I could have done without. She laughed. A real one, surprised out of her. We talked for almost 2 hours. It was the longest phone call we'd had in my adult life. It didn't fix everything. Families don't work like that, nothing does, and I still catch myself bracing for the pause sometimes, the 8-minute warm-up leading to a request. But something loosened. Daphne took longer. Daphne had built her identity, in part, on being the one who was loved right, the visible one, and my visibility threatened something in that arrangement. We're still working on it. Some days are better than others. Tristan remains steadfastly himself, which I've come to find almost comforting in its consistency. Last spring, my mother came to Toronto for a visit. A real visit, not a flyby on the way to somewhere else, not a we were in the area. She'd asked, a month in advance, and I'd said yes and meant it. I took her to the hospital on the second day, not to prove anything, just because it's where I spend most of my time and I wanted her to see it. We walked through the cardiac pavilion, my name still on the wall, slightly higher now that I'd moved into the department head position, and she stopped and read it without saying anything. Her hand went up to touch the letters, just briefly. A resident recognized me in the hallway and stopped to ask a question about a patient chart. We talked for a few minutes, and I introduced my mother, and the resident said, with the genuine reflexive respect that I'll never quite get used to, Dr. Whitmore is the best cardiac surgeon I've ever watched operate. My mother looked at me, something in her face I hadn't seen before, not pride exactly, or not just pride, more like grief and wonder mixed together. Like someone standing in a room they'd been told was empty and finding it full of light. She always was, my mother said, and her voice was strange and careful in the way voices get when someone is trying to say something true after a long time of not doing it. The resident smiled and went back to his chart. We kept walking. My mother didn't say anything else about it. She didn't have to.